Ego in itself does not have any strength. Ego in itself does not have any power. Ego in itself does not have any height. Ego in itself does not have any base. And that is why it is always in search of power, strength, more and more height. It is always planning to conquer, defeat, acquire, because in itself it is empty, it is hollow. It has to acquire, otherwise it feels useless. The more egoistic a person is, the more thirsty he is for power, the more thirsty he is for position, the more thirsty he is for height. Ego is hollow from inside. It is baseless. It has to hold something. It has to grab something. Else it will fall. It will fall miserably. It always wants to grab and grab more and grab tightly. And because ego in itself has no strength, no power, no base, no height, so it somehow wants to acquire power, gain strength, be on the summit. Initially, it tries in a more mannered way, in more sane ways. And when it fails, then it tries in clever ways. It becomes cunning. Ego can go to any extent in order to find the base, get the height, acquire the power, be on the top. It tries doing it in more civilized way, But laterwards, it starts doing all these things in very animalistic way. It becomes cruel. It starts snatching the power. When it sees that it is not able to be on the top, even after putting all the effort, then it has an idea. The idea is, whoever is on the top, pull that person itself down. If I cannot be on the top, then nobody else will be. Whoever is on the top, well, let's pull that person down. Ego somehow wants to be on the top. Ego somehow wants to be powerful. It wants to dominate. It wants to reach the summit somehow. And there begins the cruelty. There it starts doing exploitations. There it starts doing the violence. An egoistic person is out to be violent. An egoistic person is out to be selfish. An egoistic person is out to do the cruelties. Because that is the very reality of ego. If it has to survive, then it has to find power. It cannot be without power. Ego cannot agree to exist without the lust for strength, position, height. These things are the by default demand of ego. They are the necessities. At any cost, ego wants these things. The more egoistic you become, the more cruel you will become. And the more cruel you are, more egoistic you are. You may justify your deeds in so many ways. That is once again the cleverness of ego. Ego does cruelty to gain power. Ego does cleverness to be on the top. Ego plays tricks to somehow acquire and win the battle. And ego also produces logics to justify the cruelties and the violence and the cleverness and the false play. Ego is ready with a full plan. That is why you will find that everybody has justifications. The more egoistic a person is, the more justifications he will have. The very fact that you have to justify says that your deeds in themselves are telling which is reality, which you do not like, which is truth, which you don't want to hear and know you want that others should hear and believe. That is why ego is ready with justifications for being cruel and being violent and being wrong. Because ego cannot choose to be non-violent. Ego cannot choose to be honest. Ego cannot choose to be wise. Ego cannot choose to be fair, non-cruel. Ego has no rules. It does not have any moral codes. It only has goals. And the goals are to somehow be on the top, somehow reach the summit. How to reach? Somehow. In a fair way or in a clever way. It is not concerned about moralities. It is not concerned about humanness. It is only concerned about being on the top, somehow just reach. It wants to be on height because it in itself does not have any height. It in itself does not have any strength. It is powerless by default. It is weak by default. And because it is weak and powerless by default, it wants to be strong and powerful. And to be strong and powerful, it can go to any extent. It can kill people. It can play politics. It does not have any limits. What Seneca is saying is very correct. All cruelties spring from weakness. And only ego can be weak. The consciousness within you, the life within you cannot be weak by default. The consciousness within you is limitless. It has all the powers of all the stars and galaxies in the stretch of this cosmos. The consciousness within you is infinite. It is limitless. But ego is not. The consciousness within you is powerful and strong and always on the greatest height by default. It is supreme by default. It is accomplished by default. But ego is not strong by default, not powerful by default, not on height by default, not supreme by default. And that is why when a person lives his life centered around ego, then he seeks for strength and power and positions and heights. Because that ego around which the person is centered is by default weak and powerless and baseless. So he puts all the effort to find the height, because in itself it has no height. And throughout the life, it goes on doing this. Throughout the life, the person is in the race, in competition with others, pulling others' leg, elbowing people on the sides, doing dirty politics, playing the worldly tricks. And such a man is out to be cruel. Such a man is out to be violent. Such a man cannot be ever all-inclusive, compassionate, all-loving, all-caring. Such a person will always be self-centered and selfish beyond limit. And all this arises from weakness, from the state of powerlessness, from the state of being baseless. And all these strivings that the person do is to come out of these states. But the problem is, these states are there because of ego. Until the time ego is there, one cannot come out of these states. Even if that person achieves great things in the world, even if he reaches the summit, even if he is on the top, yet he will have a fear. He will seek for validations from people. He will have a fear that what if tomorrow morning somebody may pull them down? So they have to do the politics to crush people who are moving towards them. Ego cannot be on any height, even if it reaches the summit. Ego will always remain powerless even if it achieves all the powers. Ego will always remain weak even if it finds all the strength in the world. The strength of money, the strength of popularity, the strength of properties. It will remain weak. It will remain powerless. It will remain baseless because that is its by default state. That is its very nature. It cannot transcend that, though it can try to transcend, but it cannot. One who is supreme, one who is powerful is not looking for supremacy and power. One who is strong is not looking for strength. One who possesses all is not looking how to conquer more and how to acquire more. The consciousness within is that one. Ego can never be that one. Ego by default is weak. And to come out of weakness, it seeks strength. Ego by default is powerless. And to come out of this powerlessness, it seeks for power in the world. And in that seeking, in that process, it becomes violent and cruel. It begins from that state of weakness and powerlessness. Cruelty begins from here. When Seneca is saying cruelties spring from weakness, then we have to see from where weakness springs. Weakness cannot come from the consciousness within us. Weakness cannot come from the very life within us. Weakness comes from ego. And it is the ego which does the cruelties and the violence. It is the ego which does all the false game and plays tricks without caring about what will happen to the world and what will happen to the people, who will get hurt, who will die, who will get wounds. Ego does what it wants to do without caring anything for anybody. Cruelties spring from weakness, and weakness is from ego. And that is why the more egoistic a person is, the more who tries to prove that he is powerful. Anybody who is trying to prove that he is powerful is not already powerful by default. Otherwise, what is the need to prove? Anybody who is trying to prove that hate is strong is not already strong by default. Otherwise, what is the need to prove? One who is strong is strong. One who is really powerful is powerful. He is not going around and boasting in front of the crowd that I am this and I am that. But ego does it. And egoistic people do it. They have to do it. They are helpless. Because if they do not do it, they feel lost. They feel useless. Because by default, they have no base. Because ego has no base. By default, they have no power and strength because ego has no strength and power by default. And they are centered around ego. So whatever ego does, they do it. Ego becomes cruel. And so they become cruel. A shift is needed. A shift from ego to consciousness. When one becomes conscious, then one becomes powerful. Then one does not have to strive for power in the world. One only has to unfold the power that's already lying within oneself. When one centers one's life around consciousness and not ego, then one becomes strong. Because consciousness is strong. One becomes supreme because consciousness is supreme. Then one don't have to go in search of strength and supremacy and prove to the world that one is strong and one is supreme. One just has to unfold the already given strength within oneself. The strength coming from the consciousness, the power coming from the consciousness. And this power is available to you, to me, and to each individual. There is no competition here. It is not that you have been given more and I less, or I have been given more and you less. If I unfold more, then you won't be able to unfold more. There's no competition. If I win, you lose. If you win, I lose. Each person has got the infinite power, the unlimited reservoir of strength from the existence. One just have to unfold the reservoir. One just have to become conscious and explore the hidden potential one is bestowed with. And when one realizes the power, the strength that is there within oneself by default, then one does not go seeking for power and strength in the outside world. And then one does not have to be violent and do cruelties. Why will one do cruelties? Why will one do violence after that? One already had strength. One already is powerful. One will not do violence. One will be all-inclusive. One will never be cruel if one is centered around consciousness and not ego. One will love. One will be embracing everybody. One will be compassionate. The more conscious you are, more compassionate you will be, and less violent you will be, less cruel you will be. And the more egoistic you are, less compassionate you will be, less loving you will be, and more violent you will be, and more cruel you will be. Realize the infinite power within you. You are not weak. The Creator beats in your heart. Listen to the heartbeat. Realize the Creator who has created this infinite existence is beating inside you. How can you be weak? Once you realize this strength and the power that you already have been given, you will not seek for strength and power outside, and you will not do cruelties. Else, you will be egocentric, and ego is by default weak and powerless. And you will go in search of power and strength, and you will do cruelties. You will be violent.